Thanks to Bespoke Post for sponsoring this video. Welcome to the Screen Crush Break Room. I'm Ryan Airy, and this is all of the Easter eggs, references, and little things that you might have missed in Black Widow. Marvel is back in theaters, and I know a lot of you are probably watching this movie on Disney+, but it really does deserve the big screen treatment if you're able to go out and see it. The movie opens up in my home state, Ohio. OH! Natasha is living the only thing close to a normal life she's ever known, biking around like a kid from Stranger Things. When we first see her and her proxy sister Yelena, Natasha immediately copies her crab walk. Now this has a few meanings. It foreshadows that they've received the same training, and it also foreshadows the eventual villain, Taskmaster, who's able to copy other people's moves. It also foreshadows when they'll meet 21 years later, and their fight moves mirror one another perfectly. But this small gesture of copying leads into the movie's larger theme of repetition, specifically the repetition of violence. The Red Room program goes all the way back to the 1920s, as we learned in Agent Carter. Each new generation of the Widows copies the previous generation's fighting style. Here's Dottie and Agent Carter pulling the same Widow moves as Natasha. So the movie ends with Natasha fighting copies of herself. And her final foe, the Taskmaster, was created by the perpetual violence of the system that raised Natasha.
Now we see the violence inherent in the system.
So this theme of copies and repetition is repeated throughout the movie, and I'm going to call it out as we go along. Natasha and Yelena are fascinated by fireflies because, believe it or not, they don't exist in most other countries. For Natasha, this is a cornerstone memory of her final night living a somewhat normal life, because from here on out, her life will only get weirder.
I get emails from a raccoon. So.
Rachel Weisz is playing Melina Volstikov, who in the comics is the villain Iron Maiden.
Iron Maiden? Excellent!
Their home has this knit wall decoration, which, oddly enough, foreshadows the final fight later on. Dreykov's office has similar wall decorations carved out of wood. Now this seems like a coincidence, but all of these circles have exactly 16 sections, just a subtle bit of set decoration to link Melina and Dreykov, and to show that this is all secretly Dreykov's house. How sad was it seeing Natasha leave the US? She had to drive past all these American things like kids playing flashlight tag, the flag lit up on a bridge in a football stadium. Then they listened to Don McLean's American Pie. This song is filled with metaphors about Buddy Holly, Elvis, the Beatles. We can make a whole video just about the meaning of that song. But essentially, the song is about American music losing its innocence as it comes of age. And this is what happens to Natasha. The lyrics of the song, "Drove my Chevy to the levee, but the levee was dry," means driving to a river that's dried up, like the family is driving to a place where Nat's dreams of a normal childhood will be dried up. And of course, the line, "This will be the day that I die," reflects the death of her innocence. They're chased by shield trucks bearing the old school logo that was phased out after the Avengers.
Does announcing your identity on clothing help with the covert part of your job?
Just like in Civil War, the location titles in the movie are very large and take up the whole screen. Appropriate since this movie takes place directly after Civil War. It's almost like an epilogue to that movie. This scene is also where we get to see David Harbour use his Red Guardian strength. Like they say in the movie, he was a super soldier intended to be the Soviet version of Captain America. In the comics, this character was a test pilot chosen for the program and was a longtime enemy of Captain America and the Avengers. But in the movie, he's forced to make up stories and ask Nat what the real Captain America's like, since history denied him this matchup. Also in the comics, he was briefly married to Natasha decades before, because in the comics they both have slowed aging. I am curious how the Red Guardian got his powers. We know that Hydra, working through the Russians, was able to replicate Steve Rogers' blood after Howard Stark's death in 1990. So all of those test subjects lost their minds and were put into cryo freeze. But maybe Alexei was the one test subject who was mentally stable enough to take the serum. After all, he's a good man. And like Erskine says,
The serum amplifies everything that is inside, so good becomes great. Bad becomes worse.
So maybe those other guys went crazy because they were a bunch of a-holes. This sequence ends with Yelena getting sent to the Red Room to train. This scene is set after Natasha was trained as a girl, but before the training that we see in Age of Ultron, when she had her forced hysterectomy. The opening of the film is set to a moody cover of Smells Like Teen Spirit by Nirvana. This song is a 90s anthem that stands for, I guess, apathy? The apathy of Generation X. It's placed here to show us that Natasha's childhood has ended She's under the control of others and essentially is numb to all feeling. And this opening itself, by mixing archival footage and showing the evolution of the Red Room, seems very inspired by the opening of The Americans, another spy thriller about KGB operatives posing as an American family. The opening credits do a great job of establishing that at its core, this is a film about human trafficking, especially the trafficking and abuse of young girls and women. By saving all the other women and Dreykov's daughter Antonia, in a sense, Natasha is freeing her own past from her own trauma. As the credits walk us through Natasha's training, we see the photo shoot where her family posed for their Christmas pictures, and the montage ends with several shots of Dreykov's daughter before fading into Natasha. Now, the reason this ends the credits is because Natasha harming her was how she ended her time with the Russians until we get to present day. You know, it was great to see Black Widow in theaters. It's great just to be able to make plans again. So, we're planning on taking Doug on a camping trip because the open road calls to him. So, I got this sweet Weekender bag from Bespoke Post, the sponsor of this week's video. Every month, Bespoke Post sends me a box of top shelf goods. The first box I received was the Weekender bag. It's very durable, it's light, perfect for impulsive trips whenever the road calls to you. Now inside the bag I have my clothes, and this is my trail kit, which is great for overnight camping if you're a pro or a beginner like me. Alright, so let's see what we have in here. This is my gut hook knife, which you can use for camping or hunting or just for gardening. And a survival guide, because I have questions about the bears. So I'm also not comfortable going out to bars, so I got this sweet cocktail box called Last Call. It's great for Bloody Marys, fruity cocktails, and actually has the cocktail recipes written right on the label. Every one of these boxes is worth at least $70 in retail, but only costs $45 each. So here's how it works. You get a box assigned to you before it ships, but then you get to decide if you want to keep that box, swap it for another one, or just skip that month altogether for no charge. You should really go to the site and see what they offer. They have a terrific selection. And we're offering Screen Crush fans a special offer, 20% off your first box. Go to bspk.me/ScreenCrush20 or click the link in the description and enter ScreenCrush20 at checkout. Back to the Easter eggs. Next, we see Secretary of State Thunderbolt Ross lead a strike team to find her. And he's really hands-on for a Secretary of State, isn't he? I couldn't imagine Madeleine Albright or John Kerry leading a task force, could you? Now, we have a theory about why Ross is so hands-on in our Ending Explained video. Make sure you check that out. Now, he mentions that she violated the Sokovia Accords and assaulted the King of Wakanda, which happened here. I'm surprised that T'Challa even told Ross about that. He doesn't strike me as a tattletale. Then he name drops Clint Barton, Sam Wilson, and he can't remember Scott Lang's name. A subtle callback to this.
Hank Pym always said you never can trust a Stark. Who are you?
Now, all of this is more than name dropping. It helps us place the timeline of the movie without having to show flashbacks. It takes place after Civil War, but before Steve breaks his friends out of jail. On the phone, Nat mentions Ross's heart because you'll remember, he's got a bum ticker.
5 years ago, I had a heart attack.
When Yelena attacks her target in Morocco, she pulls the Arya knife drop. After Yelena goes on the run with the mind control serum, they initiate the Taskmaster protocol. Now, Taskmaster is a very different villain in the comics, but with very similar powers. In the comics, he's a former S.H.I.E.L.D. agent who can replicate anyone's fighting style. He's a villain who actually trained John Walker, U.S. agent, how to fight. Now, when we first see the Taskmaster, she's watching Black Widow's fight from Iron Man 2. Not for nothing, but Yelena gives Natasha grief for always posing, a trait that we first saw in this fight.
You whip your hair when you're fighting with the arm and the hair, and you do like a fighting pose.
I especially like when Yelena tried a three-point landing later on and realized that it's really tough on your knees. You know, look, Blade made three-point landings really cool, and then Justin Timberlake and all these superhero movies started doing it, and then Deadpool made fun of it.
You're gonna do a superhero landing. Wait for it.
And now the people who were originally doing superhero landings are making fun of them. We can now say they're 100% not cool anymore, right? Marvel's like Dwight trying to get in on the practical jokes. It was heartbreaking to watch Nat go into hiding in Norway. After Endgame, we know exactly how much being a hero means to her.
I used to have nothing. And then I got this. This job. This family.
and now that's been taken away from her. This makes her sacrifice in Civil War mean even more. Natasha's watching the James Bond movie Moonraker, which has a few similarities to Black Widow. Obviously, James Bond is a spy, and his adventures have roots in the Cold War. Moonraker also features a skydiving sequence, so does Black Widow. There's henchman villains in the movie, and the main villain is thrown out of an aerial vehicle. But mostly, both movies deal with superhumans scattered around the planet for the purpose of global conquest. In the car, she listens to Cheap Thrills by Sia. Not an Easter egg, just a song I really like. In her trailer, we see that she's bought a bottle of blonde hair dye, setting up her eventual appearance in Infinity War. So Taskmaster attacks, mimicking Captain America's maneuvers with his shield. Then she perfectly copies the Widow's flip to her feet. When the Taskmaster fights, she's given a machine-like view of the world, like Terminator. In the readout, we see a compass. There's also several pressure points to show where to hurt Natasha that would show the probability of success. And in this case, that's the clavicle. And by the way, what's all over that readout? Hexagons.
Not the beast!
The way Taskmaster's readout is depicted is another example of the movie's theme of doubles and replication. In this case, Taskmaster is the inverse of Tony Stark. See, when we can see Tony's readout, we also see his face, placing his humanity front and center. But here, we can only see the machine. Both Tony and Taskmaster gained powers after trauma, but then they went down very different paths. Then Natasha finally goes to Budapest, a place that's been teased for years.
Just like Budapest all over again.
A long way from Budapest.
So, what was it about the Chitauri invasion that reminded Nat of Budapest? Was it the collapsing buildings because she bombed a building with a little girl inside? The quip doesn't really land anymore.
You and I remember Budapest very differently.
She finally reveals that she and Clint Barton dropped bombs on Dreykov to prove her loyalty to S.H.I.E.L.D. Now, this backstory that she used a little girl for her own benefit sets Natasha up as a mirror to Dreykov himself. He used little girls, and she used one little girl to gain her freedom and move back to the United States. All of this was set up by this line in the Avengers.
Can you wipe out that much red? Dreykov's daughter?
When she enters Yelena's safe house, they mirror one another's moves. Again, replication. Yelena also has a closet stashed with weapons, mirroring Melena's closet that we'll see later. Yelena name drops Tony Stark in the Avengers, another way of reminding casual viewers why Natasha is alone on this mission. See, this is a problem that a lot of Phase 2 movies had. So for instance, while S.H.I.E.L.D. fell, where was Iron Man? When Thor was in Greenwich, where was S.H.I.E.L.D.? At least in this movie, we know why she's not getting help. Yelena explains that the new agents are chemically mind-controlled. Now this has been a trope in Black Widow comics since the mid-1960s when she first appeared as a villain. Now later, when she does a face turn, she reveals that she was actually being brainwashed. The new Widows have evil red stingers, the mirror of Natasha's blue stingers. Kind of like lightsabers, huh? Now this widow in the alley is forced to kill herself, much like the pig that Melena orders to stop breathing. Mirrors and replication. During the car chase, Taskmaster uses a bow and arrow, showing a skill that she replicated from Hawkeye. Yelena mentions staying off the radar of the big Avengers, and she references Thor, calling him a god from space. It's a fun conversation, but it goes a long way to explaining why Natasha never found out about the Red Room before. Yelena is very proud of her vest, which, like fans have guessed, she ends up giving to Natasha before Infinity War. They make a plan to break Alexei out of jail. Now, in the comics, he's the supervillain Red Guardian, one of Captain America's enemies. Now, he's bitter about not having the life of fame that Steve Rogers did when he was a patriotic propaganda tool. But ironically, Steve would have rather had the life that Alexei had in Ohio with a normal family. Now, I'm sure there's a lot of prisons in Russia, but I'm wondering if this could also be where Ivan Vanko did his time before Iron Man 2. This prison is called the Seventh Circle, symbolizing the seventh circle of hell from Dante's Inferno. Appropriate since it's a hole dug in the ground. This prison is also inspired by these panels from the Sam Neill Wade Black Widow limited series. Now that series, like this movie, deals with Natasha freeing Red Room agents from control. Now Transmacabre on Reddit broke down a few of Alexei's prison tattoos and what they mean in the real world. The stars on his shoulders mark him as a professional criminal. Eyes on the chest means I can see everything, or I am watching you. This replication of the domes of the Kremlin show the number of his criminal convictions, and the shackles on his wrist show that he served more than 5 years of time. He also has a Lenin on his left arm.
It's like Lenin said, you look for the person who will benefit and,
I am the walrus. Now, for their breakout, Natasha and Yelena are both wearing white snowsuits, like we first saw in the Deadly Origins comic series. Once again, this entire rescue sequence mirrors the opening sequence where they pulled Alexei off the ground into their airplane. Yelena describes her hysterectomy with less delicacy than Natasha used in Age of Ultron.
They sterilize you.
Alexei name drops the Avengers Quinjet and tells the girls, "Your ledgers must be dripping with red." Natasha used a similar phrase when talking about her debt to Clint.
I got red in my ledger.
Then they reunite with their mother, Milena. In her secret closet, we see the same S.H.I.E.L.D. face mask technologies that they use later in the film and we first saw in Winter Soldier and Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. Then they're reunited at the dinner table, the last place they all sat together and felt normal. Again, mirrors and replications. Then Milena fully explains their mission in America to acquire S.H.I.E.L.D./Hydra's research into mind control. She name drops the Winter Soldier project as part of this program. Now we also saw this program at work on Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. and Agent Carter. In Agent Carter, a Soviet spy named Dr. Faustus mind-controlled agents and eventually teams up with Arnim Zola to develop this same technology for S.H.I.E.L.D. This culminates in the Faustus machine that we saw in the show Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. It also means a lot to Natasha when she discovers that she was kidnapped and not abandoned. Not knowing who her real mother was really makes this line in Endgame hit harder.
Because you know your daddy's name?
I didn't.
Now back to the theme of replication, she has two mothers, Milena and her birth mother, and later acknowledges that she has two families, her spy family and the Avengers. So this movie is all about family. God, how sad was it when Natasha admitted that she still wanted to open the empty boxes at Christmas? She longed for a real life, and she ended up giving her life to make sure that Clint's children could open up presents with their father at Christmas. Yelena mentions the name Crimson Dynamo, another Russian Marvel Comics villain who was a Soviet copy of Iron Man. Dreykov's flying base is yet another replication, this time of S.H.I.E.L.D.'s helicarriers. Yelena gets her face marked up for surgery, which also happened to her in the Black Widow Marvel Knights book where she and Natasha have face swap surgeries.
I'd like to take his face off.
Now, when Taskmaster is revealed to be Antonia, it's a symbol of how Natasha's sins have come back to haunt her. But also, back to that theme of repetition, the Red Room began a cycle of exploitation that goes all the way back to the 1930s, and it's going to end here with Natasha and Antonia. When she goes down to the basement, she unleashes claws, a move she copied from the Black Panther, and also does Bucky's knife flip for Winter Soldier, and later, Cap's shield kick. And then later on, the Red Guardian shows off the same move, because cool guys don't bend over to pick up their stuff. Dreykov monologues to Natasha, showing her hundreds of widows around the world. You'll have to take my word for this, but one of these widows is very clearly your mom. But then it turns out she was playing him just like she did Loki.
You're a monster. So, Banner. That's your play.
So she deactivates the program, very similar to when she performed the info dump in Winter Soldier. And the sequence where she jumps from the window is taken directly from the Sam Neill comic series that I mentioned earlier. And then we party like it's Phase 2 with yet another sky ship falling toward the ground. Phase 1, sky beams. Phase 2, stuff falling out of the sky. Phase 3, profit. Speaking of repetition and mirrors, Natasha begins the movie escaping an airfield, trying to get a plane to take off, and it ends with her trying to bring an airship down. I'm not exactly sure why Natasha didn't go with the others or how she got away from Ross, but she does get away and she's gifted with a new Quinjet and a haircut. It makes me wonder if maybe she stayed behind to cut some kind of secret deal with Ross, like, I'll go find Steve Rogers and keep an eye on him over the next few years. That way we know he won't get into too much trouble, and if you need help, we're right there. The Quinjet at the end is the same one that Steve and his sub-Avengers team are using in Infinity War. Presumably, now Natasha's off to help Steve break the others out of the raft. And her story ends with a few notes of the Avengers theme. And then we get the post-credits scene that teases the Hawkeye TV show. And we actually have a whole video explaining the ending and how it sets up the future of the MCU and why Val is after Clint. You should check that out. But the TLDR is Val, who was also in Falcon and the Winter Soldier, was a femme fatale in the early Nick Fury comics, and she now fluctuates between being a villain and a hero. Now we've seen her managing special operatives like John Walker and now Yelena. So maybe she's working for some Black Ops agency, trying to build their own super team. Could be the Thunderbolts or the Dark Avengers. If you have any ideas, let me know in the comments below. I think we're going to get answers in August when the Hawkeye show premieres on Disney+. Val also mentions that she's allergic to the Midwest, heavily implying that Nat's grave is in Ohio. Io! Well, that's all the Easter eggs that I found, but if you found any, let me know in the comments below or at me on Twitter. And if it's your first time here, please subscribe. For Screen Crush, I'm Ryan Airy. Hi, Artemis.